Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the deep, dark, and decidedly unsettling waters of Roman gods and goddesses. Imagine yourself not in your cozy bed, but back in the chaotic, often brutal world of ancient Rome. You're navigating cobblestone streets, dodging carts, and trying to keep your sandals clean as the stench of the forum mingles with the aroma of freshly baked bread. You glance up at a towering temple, knowing full well that behind those grand facades, the divine beings worshipped within are anything but benevolent teddy bears. These aren't the gentle, all-loving deities you might be used to. Oh no. These are powerful, unpredictable, and frankly, quite disturbing entities whose whims could dictate whether you lived another day or met a truly gruesome end. Seriously, if you were actually there, you'd probably last about 5 minutes before accidentally offending some minor god of doorknobs and getting turned into a newt. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the very beginning, tracing the tangled, incestuous, and often terrifying family tree of the Roman pantheon. Forget everything you thought you knew about godly perfection. These deities are essentially glorified, superpowered humans with all the worst vices amplified to cosmic proportions. You're trying to grasp the sheer audacity of it all. How these beings, supposedly the creators and arbiters of the universe, are more dysfunctional than any reality TV family you've ever seen. It all starts, as many disturbing family sagas do, with a terrifying father figure, Saturn. Remember how you always thought of Saturn as that serene, ringed planet? Well, in Roman mythology, he's a chilling figure, the titan of time and agriculture, who, in a fit of paranoid terror, devoured his own children as soon as they were born. You can almost hear the crunch. Can't you imagine the scene? A newborn god, fresh from his mother's womb, immediately swallowed whole by his father. This wasn't some isolated incident, it was a repeated, horrifying act. A desperate attempt to defy a prophecy that one of his offspring would usurp him, just as he had usurped his own father. Caelus Uranus in Greek mythology. You try to process this, picturing Rhea, Saturn's wife and sister, forced to watch this gruesome ritual over and over, her divine tears probably forming new rivers on some mythical landscape. This cycle of generational violence and usurpation is a common thread that weaves through the entire Roman mythological fabric, setting a precedent for the chaos and brutality that would define the gods' interactions with each other and, by extension, with humanity. It's almost as if the Romans understood that power, especially absolute power, corrupts absolutely, even among the divine. This isn't just some quaint bedtime story. It's a foundational myth that tells you exactly what kind of supreme beings you're dealing with, not benevolent guardians, but dangerous, unpredictable forces. Eventually, Rhea, fed up with her monstrous husband's infanticide, devises a plan to save her sixth child. You can picture her, a goddess of motherhood, desperate and cunning, swapping the infant for a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. Saturn, in his dim-witted, panicked state, swallows the stone, none the wiser. That saved child, of course, is Jupiter, the future king of the gods, the Roman equivalent of Zeus. You can almost hear the sigh of relief from Rhea, a momentary reprieve from the endless horror. But the respite is short-lived, because Jupiter, once grown, makes his father regurgitate all his swallowed siblings, including the stone. Imagine that dinner party, a god-sized emetic, a messy expulsion of fully grown deities, still perhaps a little traumatized from their time in Dad's digestive tract. Historians still debate whether the stone remained a sacred object at Delphi, a symbol of Saturn's foolishness and Jupiter's triumph. With his siblings freed, Neptune Poseidon, Pluto Hades, Juno Hera, Ceres Demeter, and Vesta Hestia. Jupiter leads them in a brutal war against Saturn and the other Titans. This wasn't some polite disagreement. It was a decade-long cosmic battle, a cataclysmic struggle that reshaped the very foundations of the universe. You're imagining thunderbolts tearing through the sky, mountains being hurled, oceans boiling. It's the original superhero epic, but with a much higher body count and far more questionable ethics. The Titans are eventually defeated, imprisoned in the depths of Tartarus, a dark, inescapable pit far beneath the underworld. This victory solidifies Jupiter's reign, but it also establishes a chilling precedent: power is not inherited through love or justice, but seized through force and maintained through fear. You might think, well, at least now there's order, but you'd be wrong. Jupiter, the supreme ruler, is himself a deeply flawed and morally ambiguous figure. While powerful, he's notoriously promiscuous, a serial philanderer who takes on countless forms to seduce mortals and goddesses alike, often with dire consequences for the unfortunate objects of his affections. You try to count them all: Europa, Leda, Io, Callisto, Semele, Alcmene. The list goes on, a cosmic who's who of divine indiscretion. And these weren't always consensual encounters. Often, they were outright assaults, leaving behind a trail of heartbroken goddesses, enraged wives looking at you, Juno, and tragically transformed mortals. Take Io, for example. A beautiful priestess, she catches Jupiter's eye to conceal his affair from his perpetually jealous wife. Juno. Jupiter transforms Io into a white heifer. You picture at one moment a woman, the next a bewildered cow. But Juno isn't fooled. She demands the heifer as a gift, then assigns the hundred-eyed giant, Argus Panoptes, to guard her. Io's existence becomes one of perpetual torment, constantly watched, constantly moving, until Mercury, at Jupiter's behest, slays Argus. Even then, Juno sends a gadfly to endlessly sting Io, driving her across the world in maddening agony. Her only escape is finally being transformed back and ending up in Egypt, where she gives birth to Jupiter's son. You can't help but think, what a romantic. This isn't just a story. It's a profound statement on the arbitrary cruelty of the gods, their petty squabbles having devastating real-world impacts. It's enough to make you grateful for human-sized problems. Then there's Neptune, god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses. You might imagine him as a majestic, trident-wielding figure, riding the waves, and he is. But he's also prone to fits of immense rage, capable of unleashing devastating storms and tsunamis on a whim. Imagine being a sailor in ancient Rome, completely at the mercy of this temperamental deity. One wrong prayer, one minor slight, and your ship could be swallowed by the ocean. He's also quite the ladies' man himself, often competing with Jupiter for affections and contributing to the general divine chaos. You recall the story of Medusa, originally a beautiful priestess of Minerva, who was violated by Neptune in Minerva's temple. Instead of punishing Neptune, Minerva, in her rage and perhaps jealousy, transforms Medusa into a hideous gorgon with snakes for hair, whose gaze turns men to stone. It's a truly disturbing example of divine injustice, where the victim is punished for the crime committed against her, a common motif in Roman mythology. Many scholars argue this reflects a patriarchal bias inherent in the societies that crafted these myths. You can almost feel the chill of the sea, imagining Neptune's unpredictable fury, knowing that your fate could be decided by the slightest shift in his mood. And what about Pluto, the lord of the underworld? You might think of him as a gloomy, detached figure, reigning over the dead. But his introduction into the pantheon is perhaps one of the most famously disturbing tales: the abduction of Proserpina Persephone. You picture the young goddess, daughter of Ceres, gathering flowers in a meadow when the earth suddenly splits open. Pluto, on his dark chariot, bursts forth from the chasm, seizing her and dragging her down into his dark domain. It's a story of violent abduction, a mother's inconsolable grief, and a world plunged into eternal winter as Ceres, goddess of agriculture, mourns her lost daughter. The earth, mirroring Ceres' sorrow, refuses to yield crops, causing widespread famine and suffering among mortals. This desperate situation forces Jupiter to intervene. Negotiating a compromise, Proserpina would spend part of the year in the underworld with Pluto and part of the year on Earth with her mother. This myth, while explaining the changing seasons, also serves as a stark reminder of the gods' absolute power and their willingness to inflict suffering on both mortals and other deities to satisfy their desires. You imagine the deep, echoing silence of the underworld, the chill of eternal night, and the forced companionship with a god who took her by force. It's not exactly a fairy tale wedding. Then there's Juno, Jupiter's wife and sister, the queen of the gods. You might expect her to be a figure of wisdom and serenity. Instead, she is perhaps the most vengeful and consistently angry of the major deities, driven to fury by Jupiter's endless infidelities. She is a goddess of marriage and childbirth, yet her own marriage is a continuous saga of betrayal and jealous rage. Her wrath is legendary, and she often directs it not at Jupiter, but at his mortal lovers and their innocent offspring. Remember, Hercules' Juno made his life a living hell, driving him to madness and forcing him to commit terrible deeds, simply because he was the product of one of Jupiter's many affairs. You picture her, eyes blazing, sending snakes to strangle a baby in its crib or devising elaborate torments for hapless mortals who merely crossed paths with her husband. Her bitterness is palpable, a constant dark cloud hanging over Olympus, making you wonder why any god or mortal would ever dare to cross her. She is a reminder that even among the divine, personal grudges can have devastating, far-reaching consequences. Even seemingly nice gods have their disturbing moments. Apollo, god of music, poetry, light, and healing, also brings plague and pestilence. His love affairs are often disastrous, marked by unrequited passion and tragic outcomes. Take the story of Daphne, a nymph who fled his advances. Rather than accepting her rejection, Apollo relentlessly pursued her until she begged her father, a river god, to transform her into a laurel tree to escape him. You can almost hear her desperate cries as her skin turns to bark, her limbs to branches. Apollo's response? To claim the laurel as his sacred plant, wearing its leaves as a wreath, a disturbing trophy of his failed conquest. It's a chilling reminder that divine desire often trumped consent, and resistance was met not with understanding, but with transformation or destruction. The Roman gods are not aspirational figures. They are reflections of humanity's darker impulses, magnified to an unimaginable scale. Their lives are filled with power struggles, betrayals, revenge, and a shocking disregard for the well-being of others, especially mortals. You begin to understand that worshipping these deities wasn't necessarily about seeking moral guidance or divine love, but about appeasing unpredictable forces, hoping to avoid their wrath, and perhaps, just perhaps, currying a little favor. It's a precarious existence, living under the shadow of such a chaotic and often cruel pantheon. You start to feel a strange mix of relief that you're not living in ancient Rome, and a slight shiver down your spine, wondering if echoes of these divine dramas still linger in the world around you. You've just begun to scratch the surface of the Roman gods' unsettling family dynamics, and already you're feeling a faint unease. But it's not just their dysfunctional relationships that are disturbing, it's the sheer audacity of the ways the Romans tried to interact with them, the unholy appetites and vile rituals they engaged in, hoping to appease or even manipulate these volatile deities. You're no longer just observing. You're imagining yourself immersed in the daily life of an ancient Roman, where every sneeze could be an omen, every misplaced coin a sign of divine displeasure. You live in a world where the gods are omnipresent, omnipotent, and yet, frustratingly, often unpredictable. This constant anxiety breeds a fascinating, if sometimes horrifying, array of practices. One of the most common ways to interact with the gods was through sacrifices. You might picture a pristine temple, a gentle offering of fruit or wine. Think again. While simple offerings certainly occurred, the most significant sacrifices involved animals. You're standing there, perhaps in the bustling Forum Romanum, as a procession approaches. Priests, robed in white, led a pristine white bull, adorned with ribbons, towards the altar. This isn't just a symbolic act. It's a very real, very bloody one. The animal is inspected for any blemishes. Only perfect specimens are acceptable to the gods. Then, with a chilling swiftness, its throat is cut. You hear the gurgle, see the rush of blood, which is collected in special bowls. The internal organs, the liver, heart, lungs, are meticulously examined by augurs, specialists who interpret the will of the gods through these visceral entrails. A misshapen liver could mean impending disaster, a perfectly formed one, divine favor. Many historians still debate the precise methodology and consistency of these divinations, questioning how much was genuine belief versus political opportunism. You try to hold your breath. The metallic scent of fresh blood thick in the air, a stark reminder of the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about piety, it was about survival. A bad omen could halt a military campaign, delay a public works project, or even lead to the downfall of a political figure. Imagine the pressure on those augurs, knowing that their interpretation of a sheep's liver could change the course of history. You quickly realize that in Rome, even your dinner could be a divine message. Beyond animal sacrifice, there were more peculiar, even disturbing, offerings. You might, for instance, encounter a practice involving votive offerings. These weren't always precious jewels or gold. Sometimes, if you were suffering from an ailment, you might offer a clay replica of the afflicted body part to the relevant deity, hoping for a cure. You picture rows upon rows of crude clay arms, legs, eyes, even internal organs, hanging in temples, testaments to human suffering and desperate prayers. It's a strangely visceral sight, a testament to the Romans' pragmatic approach to their gods. Here, Mars, I offer you this clay leg. Please fix my real one. It's a kind of divine barter system, where health and well-being were negotiated with tangible, albeit clay, representations. Then there's the practice of devotio, a truly chilling concept that reveals the extreme lengths Romans would go to secure victory in battle. Imagine a general, facing certain defeat, making a solemn vow to the gods of the underworld, I offer myself and the enemy legions to you. This isn't just a dramatic pronouncement, it's a genuine, self-sacrificial act. The general would ride into the thick of battle, seeking death, believing that by offering his own life, he would guarantee the destruction of the enemy. You can almost see the look of grim determination on his face, a mixture of patriotism and desperate belief. It's a concept that seems utterly alien in your modern world, where self-preservation is paramount. But for the Romans, facing the wrath of the gods in the afterlife might have been less terrifying than facing defeat in this one. It's a sobering thought that for them, death could be an act of strategic warfare, a final, terrifying gamble. And speaking of death, let's not forget the Roman funerary rites, which often had their own unsettling elements. While not always directly involving the Olympian gods, they reveal a deep-seated fear of vengeful spirits and a desire to ensure a peaceful transition to the afterlife. You might witness a procession where actors wearing the masks of the deceased's ancestors march alongside the body, embodying the family's lineage, a ghostly parade of the past. The Romans believed it was crucial to properly bury their dead, or else the restless spirits could haunt the living. You can almost feel the chill wind as you imagine an unquiet spirit, wandering endlessly, unable to find peace due to some forgotten ritual or slight. This fear of the restless dead was so pervasive that it even influenced legal codes and social customs. You recall the peculiar practice of burying important figures with small gold leaves inscribed with instructions for navigating the underworld, like tiny maps for the dead, a strange combination of reverence and meticulous preparation for a journey into the unknown. But perhaps one of the most uniquely disturbing Roman practices was their engagement with oracles and soothsayers. You're not just going to a fortune teller, you're seeking divine prophecy, often through highly ritualized and sometimes bizarre means. While the most famous oracle was Apollo's at Delphi Greek, but deeply influential on Roman thought, the Romans had their own methods. The Sibylline books, for example, were a collection of prophecies consulted only in times of extreme crisis. You can picture the senators, grim-faced and anxious, approaching the temple where these sacred texts were kept, knowing that the cryptic verses within held the key to averting famine, plague, or military disaster. The prophecies were notoriously ambiguous, requiring careful interpretation by a select few priests, adding an air of mystique and, perhaps, manipulation. And then there were the haruspices, who, like the augurs examining animal entrails, specialized in reading omens from the organs of sacrificial animals, particularly the liver. You imagine a haruspix, his hands stained with blood, intently studying the convolutions and blemishes of a freshly extracted liver, searching for signs from the gods. This wasn't a quick glance, it was a methodical, almost scientific, process rooted in ancient Etruscan traditions. The accuracy of their readings was taken incredibly seriously, capable of influencing major political and military decisions. If the liver looked bad, a battle might be postponed, or a new law delayed. You can almost feel the tension in the air as important figures await the haruspex's pronouncements, their futures hanging on the state of a bovine organ. It's a chilling thought that the fate of an empire could hinge on such a visceral, organic prognostication. The daily Roman worldview was saturated with superstition. You're constantly on guard, aware of tiny, almost invisible forces that could turn your day from prosperous to disastrous. The Romans feared the evil eye malus oculus, believing that envious or malicious glances could bring misfortune. You might find yourself instinctively making a gesture, like clenching your fist with your thumb between your fingers, the manofico, or wearing an amulet shaped like a phallus, believed to ward off evil. You quickly learn that even casual compliments could be dangerous, if not immediately followed by facinum, to avert the evil eye or a touch of iron. Imagine the constant low-level paranoia, always worrying about who might be casting a malevolent gaze in your direction. It's a subtle but pervasive form of anxiety, making everyday interactions a minefield of potential curses. Even seemingly mundane aspects of life were imbued with sacred significance. Crossing a threshold with your left foot first was considered bad luck. Spilling salt was an ill omen. Sneezing at an inopportune moment could be a sign from the gods. You try to imagine living under such a constant barrage of potential omens and superstitions, where every action, no matter how small, could have divine repercussions. It's enough to make you walk around on eggshells, perpetually trying to appease unseen forces. Archaeological evidence often reveals small charms and amulets found in Roman homes, suggesting the widespread belief in personal protection against such pervasive, subtle threats. It's a fascinating insight into the psychological landscape of the ancient Roman, a mind constantly seeking order and meaning in a chaotic, divinely influenced world. And don't forget the Vestal Virgins, an elite group of priestesses dedicated to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, home, and family. Their role was absolutely crucial, maintaining the sacred fire in Vesta's temple in the Roman Forum. This fire was believed to be inextricably linked to the prosperity and safety of Rome itself. You watch them, these young women, chosen before puberty and bound by a sacred vow of chastity for 30 years. Their power was immense. They could pardon criminals. Their testimony was sacred. But their punishment for breaking their vow was utterly horrifying, being buried alive. You shiver at the thought. if a Vestal virgin allowed the sacred fire to go out, or, worse, lost her virginity. She was walled up in an underground chamber with a small amount of food and water, left to die a slow, agonizing death. It's a chilling reminder of the extreme measures taken to maintain religious purity and appease the gods, and the terrifying consequences for those who failed. Imagine the immense pressure on these young women, knowing that their entire city's fate, and their own life, hung on their unwavering piety and chastity. It's a stark illustration of the Roman willingness to sacrifice individuals for the perceived greater good, and to inflict truly disturbing punishments in the name of divine order. These practices, from the bloody altars to the fear of the evil eye, paint a picture of a society deeply intertwined with, and deeply fearful of, its gods. The Romans weren't just worshipping, they were constantly negotiating, supplicating, and sometimes even trying to trick their deities. It's a world where the divine isn't distant and abstract, but terrifyingly immediate and disturbingly capricious. You might feel a strange sense of relief that your own concept of divinity is perhaps a little less demanding, and certainly less bloody. You've explored the family squabbles and the unsettling rituals, but now you're about to venture into the true heart of the Roman pantheon's disturbing nature mythology's dark underbelly. This isn't about the famous heroic deeds or the glorious triumphs. It's about the lesser-known, truly unsettling myths where divine justice is brutal, and heroes often face fates worse than death. These are the stories the Romans told themselves that revealed a universe often indifferent, sometimes actively hostile, to human suffering, where piety was no guarantee of safety. You're beginning to understand that Roman mythology isn't a collection of comforting fables, but a chilling mirror reflecting the capricious and often cruel nature of power. Let's start with some of the more infamous figures who dared to challenge the gods, only to meet truly grotesque ends. Take Marsyas, for example. You might remember Apollo, the god of music, light, and healing, but he also had a deeply vindictive side. Marsyas, a satyr, was a talented flute player who foolishly challenged Apollo to a musical contest. The terms were simple: the victor could do whatever he wanted with the loser. You can already feel the dread building. Right, Marsyas played his flute, enchanting his audience with its wild, earthy tones. Apollo, of course, played his lyre, producing divine, ethereal music. The Muses, acting as judges, declared Apollo the winner unsurprisingly, given his godly status. And what did Apollo do? He exacted his prize in the most horrifying way imaginable. He flayed Marsyas alive. You can almost hear the screams, the tearing of flesh, the gruesome spectacle. Imagine the sheer agony. The skin slowly peeled from the living body, a gruesome trophy of a god's petty victory. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a public display of divine ruthlessness, a chilling warning to anyone who dared to challenge the established order, or merely to be too good at something. It's a stark reminder that in the Roman divine hierarchy, hubris was met not with gentle correction, but with excruciating, drawn-out suffering. Then there's the story of Arachne, another mortal who dared to boast of her skill, this time in weaving. You picture a young, exceptionally talented weaver, perhaps a bit too proud of her craft. She claimed her skill surpassed even that of Minerva Athena in Greek mythology, the goddess of wisdom, crafts, and strategic warfare. Minerva, predictably, was incensed by this mortal insolence. She disguised herself as an old woman and warned Arachne to retract her challenge. But Arachne, stubborn and confident, refused. So, Minerva revealed herself, and the weaving contest began. Arachne wove a tapestry depicting the gods' scandalous and often immoral dalliances, highlighting their deceptions and cruelties. Minerva, in contrast, wove a tapestry illustrating the glory and power of the gods, subtly warning mortals about the consequences of challenging them. Even Minerva had to admit Arachne's work was flawless. But instead of praise, Minerva Consumed by fury, and perhaps jealousy, at Arachne's undeniable talent and bold subject matter, violently attacked Arachne and her work. Tearing the tapestry to shreds, Arachne, despairing, tried to hang herself. Minerva, in a twisted act of mercy, saved her, but transformed her into a spider, condemning her to weave for all eternity. You can almost see the tiny, frantic movements of the spider, forever spinning its web, a perpetual reminder of a mortal's hubris and a goddess's disproportionate wrath. It's a disturbing tale about the dangers of exceeding your station, and the bitter jealousy even powerful deities can harbor. These stories aren't just about cosmic comeuppance. They're about the fragility of human existence in a world governed by beings whose emotions are as volatile as their power is absolute. You start to feel a creeping sense of vulnerability, knowing that even your talents, if too pronounced, could attract unwanted divine attention. Consider the pervasive and often terrifying nature of fate fatum in Roman thought. While not a god itself, it was an inescapable force, often personified by the Fates Parcae, three goddesses who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. You imagine them, ancient and unfeeling, their hands deftly manipulating the delicate fibers of existence. Clotho spun the thread of life. Lachesis measured its length. And Atropos, the most terrifying, cut it, ending a life. There was no escaping their decree, no pleading, no bargaining. Even the most powerful gods were, to some extent, subject to the fates. You can almost hear the snip of Atropos's shears, a chilling sound that signals the inevitable end. Regardless of wealth, power, or piety, it instilled a sense of fatalism in the Roman psyche. You could strive, you could pray, but ultimately, your destiny was already woven. This philosophical undercurrent made many Roman myths even darker, as characters often struggled valiantly against a preordained, often tragic, doom. Scholars continue to analyze the interplay between free will and divine predetermination in Roman philosophical and religious thought, a debate still relevant today. And what about the concept of divine madness or furor? When a god wished to punish or manipulate a mortal, they might inflict them with madness, stripping them of their reason and turning them into instruments of chaos or self-destruction. You can imagine the horror of suddenly losing your mind, of being driven by unseen forces to commit terrible acts, your own will utterly subsumed by a divine whim. Remember Hercules, driven to madness by Juno, causing him to murder his own wife and children. It's a chilling reminder that the gods could inflict not just physical suffering, but also mental and psychological torment, turning the very essence of your being against you. You feel a profound empathy for these characters. Their minds hijacked, their lives irrevocably shattered by a god's arbitrary decision. The underworld itself, ruled by Pluto, offered its own catalog of grim and unending punishments for those who offended the gods. You're not talking about a quick death and oblivion. You're talking about eternal torment tailored to the specific sin. Take Tantalus, who famously tried to serve the gods his own son for dinner, his eternal punishment standing in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink, and under fruit-laden branches that moved away whenever he reached for them, forever tormented by hunger and thirst. You can almost hear his desperate gasps, his parched throat, the unreachable sustenance. Then there's Sisyphus, condemned to endlessly push a massive boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down just as he reached the summit. Imagine the sheer, soul-crushing futility of that task, the endless, pointless effort. It's a symbol of eternal, meaningless labor, a punishment that attacks the very essence of purpose. And Ixion, who tried to seduce Juno, was bound to a perpetually spinning fiery wheel. You picture his agony, constantly turning, forever burning, a testament to divine wrath against lust and insolence. These aren't just mythical figures. They are cautionary tales, vivid warnings of the consequences of impiety, of daring to cross the gods. They underscore a brutal concept of justice where the punishment often far outweighed the crime and was, more often than not, eternal. Even the heroes of Roman mythology are not spared from horrific fates. Consider Aeneas, the quintessential Roman hero, destined to found Rome. His journey is fraught with unimaginable suffering, loss, and the constant interference of vengeful gods, particularly Juno. He loses his wife in the burning city of Troy, is driven across treacherous seas, endures countless battles, and sacrifices personal happiness for the sake of his divine destiny. You feel the weight of his burdens, the immense pressure of knowing that the future of an entire civilization rests on your shoulders, and that powerful deities are actively working against you. His heroism isn't glamorous, it's a grim, arduous struggle against overwhelming odds, a testament to the idea that even divine favor comes at an excruciating cost. His story highlights a core Roman belief: true glory is forged in suffering. And often, the gods are merely cruel instruments of that suffering. These dark mythological narratives highlight a world where divine power is arbitrary, justice is often skewed, and human suffering is frequently a byproduct of godly whims or petty feuds. You begin to understand why Romans might have approached their gods with a mixture of reverence and deep, abiding fear. It wasn't about love, but about survival. It was about performing the right rituals, saying the right prayers, and desperately hoping you wouldn't be the next unfortunate mortal to catch a god's capricious eye. You realize that beneath the grand temples and impressive statues lay a deeply unsettling spiritual landscape, where the line between divine power and outright tyranny was often blurred, and the cost of crossing that line was unfathomable. These stories aren't just historical curiosities, they are ancient echoes of humanity's attempts to grapple with uncontrollable forces, to make sense of a universe that often seemed indifferent to their pleas. You've explored the gods' chaotic natures and the terrifying punishments they inflict. But now you're going to witness perhaps the most audacious and, frankly, disturbing aspect of Roman power emperors as gods: a dangerous game. Imagine a world where your ruler isn't just a powerful political figure, but is actively worshipped as a divine being, a living god walking among mortals. This isn't just about flattery or propaganda. It's a profound intertwining of religious belief and political control, a twisted evolution of divine authority that often led to tyranny, paranoia, and violent ends. You're stepping into a realm where the line between mortal and immortal blurs, with disastrous consequences. The concept of deifying rulers wasn't entirely new. Heroes and founders had been honored after death in various cultures. But in Rome, particularly during the imperial period, it took on a chilling, immediate reality. It began subtly enough with Julius Caesar. While not officially deified during his lifetime, his immense popularity and the cult that sprang up around him after his assassination laid the groundwork. You can almost see the shift from a revered leader to someone whose spirit, whose genius, was considered divine. After his death, the Roman Senate formally declared him a god. Divus Iulius, his adopted son, Augustus, shrewdly leveraged this. He wasn't a god himself, he claimed, but the son of a god, Divi Filius. This subtle distinction allowed him to bask in reflected divine glory without inciting too much immediate backlash, while simultaneously establishing a powerful precedent. You watch as a new form of worship emerges, not just for the ancient gods, but for the very man who holds supreme power. It's a masterful, yet deeply unsettling, political maneuver, effectively cementing his authority by cloaking it in divine sanction. As the empire solidified, the idea of the emperor as a living god became more pronounced, especially in the eastern provinces where monarchical cults were more common. But even in Rome, the pressure to conform, to participate in the imperial cult, grew. You, as a Roman citizen, would be expected to offer incense and prayers not just to Jupiter or Minerva, but also to the numen divine spirit of the emperor. Imagine the cognitive dissonance bowing before a statue of a man you might have seen walking down the street. or who you know to be fallible, perhaps even corrupt. It's a powerful tool of social cohesion, forcing loyalty through religious observance. To refuse was not just disloyalty, it was sacrilege, a direct challenge to both state and divine authority, often met with severe penalties. Historians still debate the extent to which ordinary Romans genuinely believed in the divinity of their living emperors versus performing it as a civic duty. This deification had a profound impact on the emperors themselves, often feeding monumental egos and leading to truly megalomaniacal behavior. Take Caligula, for instance. You recall the stories of his increasingly bizarre and terrifying reign. He didn't just accept deification, he demanded it with an insane fervor. He had a bridge built to connect his palace to the temple of Jupiter, suggesting he literally wished to converse with the king of the gods, or perhaps even replace him. He claimed to be Jupiter himself, or sometimes Mercury, or even Venus. He would hold conversations with a statue of Jupiter, whispering secrets or shouting insults. You can almost picture him, eyes wide with a terrifying blend of madness and self-importance, ordering sacrifices in his own name. He even appointed his favorite horse, Incitatus, as a priest, and allegedly planned to make him a consul, a grotesque mockery of Roman institutions. His reign became a horrifying spectacle of arbitrary cruelty, fueled by an unchallenged sense of divine entitlement. When you believe you are a god, accountability simply ceases to exist, and the lives of mere mortals become utterly disposable. His eventual assassination was almost inevitable. A desperate act by those who could no longer tolerate a ruler who believed himself above all human and divine law. Then there was Nero, another emperor whose divine pretensions led to widespread terror. While he didn't demand worship as a living god in the same explicit way as Caligula, he certainly cultivated an image of divine artistic genius. Seeing himself as a new Apollo, he performed publicly as a musician and actor, activities considered undignified for an emperor. Yet he saw them as expressions of his superior, almost divine, talent. He envisioned Rome rebuilt as Neropolis after the Great Fire, a city reflecting his own grand artistic vision, perhaps even a new golden age ushered in by a divine emperor. His persecution of Christians, who refused to worship the emperor, was a direct consequence of this imperial cult. For Christians, their refusal was a matter of faith. For the Romans, it was an act of sedition against a divine ruler and the state. You can almost hear the roar of the crowds in the arena, the cries of those condemned for defying the imperial cult, a chilling demonstration of the absolute power wielded by a god on earth. His descent into tyranny, marked by matricide, paranoia, and artistic indulgence, illustrates the dangerous psychological effects of such unchecked divine authority. The irony, of course, is that while these emperors demanded to be worshipped as gods, their reigns often ended in violent coups, assassinations, or civil war. You remember the phrase, "He who lives by the sword, dies by the sword." In this case, it was often, "He who rules as a god, dies a very mortal death." The very power they claimed, derived from divine sanction, often made them dangerously detached from reality, leading to decisions that alienated the military, the Senate, and the populace, ultimately sealing their grim fates. The Roman emperors who claimed divinity weren't just figures of power, they were figures of immense, almost unbearable pressure, constantly having to prove their divine favor, lest it be seen as a sign of weakness or, worse, divine abandonment. Even for those emperors deemed good, the imperial cult presented complex challenges. Augustus, for all his political genius, had to navigate this delicate balance between being divi filius and immortal ruler. Subsequent emperors like Vespasian, known for his pragmatic approach, famously quipped on his deathbed, "Ve, puto deus fio." Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god. A cynical jab at the very practice he would soon undergo. This reveals a hidden tension. Even some emperors knew the pretense was just that, a pretense. Yet, the machinery of the imperial cult, once established, was difficult to dismantle, a pervasive element of Roman political life that lingered for centuries. The practice of imperial deification even extended to the emperor's wives and other family members, often after their deaths. You would see temples dedicated to Diva Augusta, the deified Livia, Augustus's wife, or Diva Faustina, Antoninus Pius's wife. This further elevated the imperial family to a quasi-divine status, creating a dynasty not just of blood, but of sacred lineage. It's a clever way to solidify power, to make resistance not just treason, but sacrilege. You imagine the grand processions, the solemn ceremonies, all designed to reinforce the idea that this family, the imperial family, was somehow chosen, somehow set apart, blessed by the gods themselves. The dangerous game played by emperors who claim divinity highlights a darker aspect of Roman religion, its adaptability and willingness to serve political ends. The gods weren't just worshipped, they were tools, instruments of power wielded by ambitious men. This blurring of lines between religious authority and political might created a system where dissent was heresy, and opposition to the emperor was opposition to the divine. It produced rulers who believed themselves infallible, leading to excesses of cruelty and arbitrary power that rivaled the capriciousness of the Olympian gods themselves. You realize that while the ancient gods of Olympus had their flaws, at least they were distant. The emperor gods, however, were right there, walking the streets, their divine wrath manifesting as legions and executioners. It's a far more immediate and terrifying threat, knowing that the God you must placate is a living, breathing human being with all the accompanying human frailties, amplified by absolute power. The Roman imperial cult, therefore, stands as a chilling testament to the dangers of conflating secular power with divine authority. A lesson that echoes through history, reminding you of the fine line between reverence and absolute tyranny. You've witnessed the emperor's dangerous dance with divinity, but now you're going to delve deeper into the pervasive, almost suffocating atmosphere of Roman life, where every shadow might conceal a malevolent force, the shadow of superstition. This isn't about grand sacrifices or imperial cults. It's about the everyday anxieties, the whispers in the dark, and the myriad of tiny, often bizarre, beliefs that dictated the actions of ordinary Romans. You find yourself navigating a world where unseen forces, curses, evil eyes, and vengeful spirits were not just abstract concepts, but tangible threats that influenced every decision. From planting a crop to choosing a spouse, it's a low-grade, persistent paranoia that colored every aspect of existence. You are walking through the bustling streets of Rome, and you notice little details. Perhaps you see a merchant quickly touching a small, phallic charm hanging above his stall, a fascinum, believed to ward off evil and bring good luck. This isn't just decoration, it's a serious form of protection. The Romans believed intensely in the evil eye, malus oculus, the idea that a malevolent glance, often born of envy, could bring misfortune, illness, or even death. You can almost feel the weight of those unseen, jealous eyes, constantly scrutinizing, constantly judging. If someone complimented your child, you might immediately say fascinum, or subtly spit to avert the ill effects. It's a bizarre ritual, spitting to ward off bad luck, but it was common. Imagine the social awkwardness. Someone praises your new toga, and your immediate instinct is to spit on the ground. It highlights a pervasive sense of vulnerability, where even positive attention could be a disguised threat. Archaeological discoveries of these charms and amulets in Roman homes and graves suggest just how deeply ingrained this belief was in daily life. Then there were the curses, often inscribed on lead tablets called deficciones. You might stumble upon one of these in an ancient well or buried in a graveyard. They were literally curses, carefully written out, sometimes backwards or with strange, Magical symbols, invoking chthonic deities or spirits to bring harm to an enemy. Imagine the desperation or malice that would drive someone to commission such an object. May name never sleep, or may name lose his voice in court, or may name be unable to perform in bed. These weren't just angry thoughts, they were deliberate, tangible attempts to inflict pain and misfortune through supernatural means. You picture the person carefully folding the lead, piercing it with nails, then secretly burying it, convinced they were unleashing dark forces. It's a chilling insight into the petty rivalries, jealousies, and outright hatreds that simmered beneath the surface of Roman society, given terrifying form through ritual. The fear of ghosts and restless spirits was another deeply unsettling aspect of Roman superstition. The Romans believed that if a person was not properly buried, or if they died a violent or unjust death, their spirit might linger on earth, becoming a vengeful ghost lemurs or larvae capable of causing harm. You can almost feel the chill in the air on certain nights, particularly during the Lemuria festival in May, when families would perform rituals to appease these restless spirits, spitting black beans and clashing bronze pots to drive them away. Imagine trying to sleep, knowing that unquiet dead might be wandering just beyond your walls, driven by ancient grievances. This wasn't just folklore, it was a deeply held belief that influenced burial practices, mourning rituals, and even the layout of cities' graveyards were typically outside city walls to keep the dead at bay. You understand why Romans would go to such lengths to ensure proper burials, lest they invite unwelcome spectral visitors. Omens were everywhere. Read in the flight of birds, the roll of thunder, or even a sudden twitch of your eyelid. If you were about to embark on a journey and heard a crow caw on your left, you might cancel your plans, believing it to be a bad omen. If a snake crossed your path, it could be a warning from the gods. You feel the constant pressure of trying to interpret the mundane world for divine messages. A perpetual state of heightened awareness, always searching for signs. This pervasive belief in omens meant that daily life was a constant negotiation with unseen forces, a delicate dance around potential misfortune. While modern science dismisses such beliefs, ancient Roman texts, particularly historical accounts, are filled with references to omens influencing major political and military decisions, highlighting their profound impact on society. Even dreams held immense significance. You would diligently try to remember your dreams, believing they were messages from the gods or warnings from the dead. Dream interpreters were sought out, and elaborate rituals might be performed to appease deities revealed in sleep. Imagine the anxiety of a disturbing dream, knowing it might be a divine prophecy of impending doom, or a desperate plea from a deceased relative. Your subconscious mind was not your own. It was a potential conduit for supernatural communication, adding another layer of unsettling meaning to your nighttime hours. The Romans also had specific beliefs about certain days of the year. Some days were considered fastus favorable for legal and public business, while others were nefastus unfavorable. You might find yourself planning your entire week around these auspicious and inauspicious days, unwilling to risk offending the gods by transacting business on the wrong day. Imagine the frustration of having an urgent matter, only to find the day is nefastus, forcing you to postpone your plans and wait for a more favorable alignment of cosmic forces. It's a subtle but powerful way in which superstition regulated the flow of daily life, adding friction and delay where you least expected it. Then there was the peculiar belief in apotropaic magic, rituals or objects designed to ward off evil. You might see bells hung on houses to frighten away evil spirits, or images of grotesque figures, like the Gorgon Medusa, carved into buildings for protection. These were not just decorative, they were actively believed to possess protective powers, creating an invisible shield against malevolent forces. You consider the small children in Rome, often wearing a bulla, a protective amulet around their necks, filled with charms to guard against evil. It's a tender, but also somewhat unsettling image, highlighting the constant vulnerability felt by Romans, even for their most innocent and beloved. The fear of witches and sorcerers was also very real. You hear whispers of individuals who could cast spells, brew potions, and invoke dark spirits to harm others or control their will? Roman law even had provisions against harmful magic. Imagine the paranoia if something inexplicable happened. If you fell ill suddenly, or if your crops failed, your first thought might be that you had been targeted by a malevolent practitioner of magic. It's a world where every misfortune could be attributed to a hidden, malevolent human agent, adding another layer of suspicion and fear to social interactions. You learn to be wary, to watch your back, knowing that unseen battles for power and influence might be fought not with swords, but with spells and curses. This pervasive shadow of superstition meant that the Roman world was far from rationally ordered. Beneath the grand philosophical pronouncements and the impressive legal codes lay a vibrant, chaotic substratum of fear, belief, and ritual. Every creak of a door, every strange dream, every chance encounter could be a sign, an omen, a blessing, or a curse. You realize that for the average Roman, life was a continuous, anxious negotiation with the unseen, a desperate attempt to stay on the good side of a multitude of often capricious powers. This constant vigilance, this ingrained fear, must have been exhausting. Yet it was simply the fabric of their reality. You begin to appreciate the quiet predictability of your own world, where a black cat merely means a feline, and a broken mirror is just 7 years of bad luck, not a guaranteed visit from an angry underworld deity. You've explored the subtle and not-so-subtle threats that permeated daily Roman life, but now you're entering the very heart of their religious landscape, sacred spaces, sinister secrets. You're no longer just dealing with abstract beliefs or individual anxieties. You're stepping into the physical locations where the Romans sought to connect with their gods, where grand rituals and hushed ceremonies took place. Yet, even within these hallowed grounds, you'll discover hidden histories, unsettling practices, and the chilling realization that piety often masked darker purposes. Imagine walking through the sprawling complex of the Roman Forum. You pass grand temples dedicated to Jupiter, Saturn, and Vesta. At first glance, they seem like magnificent testaments to devotion. But look closer. The Temple of Saturn, for instance, wasn't just a place of worship for the ancient Titan. It also served as the Roman state treasury Aerarium Saturni. You can almost hear the clinking of coins, the hushed discussions of public funds, intertwining sacred space with the very pragmatic, often ruthless, business of empire. This duality, where religious awe met political and financial power, infused these spaces with a particular kind of gravity. You realize that even in their most sacred buildings, the Romans blended the divine with the deeply practical, sometimes even exploitative, aspects of their society. Consider the Vestal Virgin's house, Atrium Vestae, adjacent to the Temple of Vesta. You remember the terrifying punishment for breaking their vows being buried alive? This was their home, a place of immense privilege, but also immense pressure. You can picture these women, living a life apart, meticulously guarding the sacred flame that represented Rome's very survival. But behind the grandeur and the solemn duties, there were human dramas, whispered temptations, and the constant, chilling awareness of their potential fate. The archaeological remains show beautiful courtyards and luxurious rooms, a gilded cage designed to house the living embodiment of Roman purity, and, simultaneously, a stark reminder of the brutal consequences of perceived transgression. Some historians argue that the severe punishment for Vestal virgins served not just religious purity, but also as a powerful tool for social control, reinforcing patriarchal norms. But not all sacred spaces were grand public temples. Many rituals took place in far more secluded, even eerie, locations. Imagine ancient groves Lucy or hidden caves, far from the bustling city, where more archaic, chthonic deities were worshipped. These weren't places of bright altars and public spectacle. Here, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The sunlight dappled and weak, It's in these places that you might find evidence of older, perhaps more primal, forms of worship, rituals that might have seemed disturbing even to many Romans. These were the settings for mysterious rites, often nocturnal, where the boundaries between the living and the dead, the human and the divine, felt much thinner. You feel a primal shiver down your spine, the kind of ancient fear that resonates with the oldest parts of your brain. Take, for instance, the Lupercal Cave. At the base of the Palatine Hill, this was believed to be the spot where the she-wolf suckled Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome. Every February, during the festival of the Lupercalia, you would witness a bizarre and unsettling ritual. Naked young men, priests of Lupercus, an ancient fertility god, would sacrifice goats and a dog. Then, smeared with blood and wearing strips of the sacrificed animals' skins, they would run through the streets of Rome, lightly striking women with strips of the bloody hide. This wasn't an act of violence. It was believed to promote fertility. You can almost hear the cheers mixed with the shrieks, the strange juxtaposition of solemnity and wild abandon, the primal connection to blood and animalistic power. It's a vivid example of a deeply ingrained, almost pagan, ritual continuing well into the sophisticated Roman era. A direct link to the raw, untamed forces believed to govern life and death. It shows that even in the heart of their advanced civilization, there was a deep-seated connection to more visceral, ancient forms of spirituality. Then there are the catacombs, especially once Christianity began to spread. While not sacred spaces in the traditional sense of Roman paganism, they became sacred to the early Christians and offer a chilling insight into subterranean worship and burial. Imagine descending into these dark, labyrinthine tunnels, carved out of soft rock, filled with the graves of thousands. Here, early Christians, often persecuted, would gather in secret, their rituals conducted in the oppressive stillness. Surrounded by the dead, you feel the cool, damp air, the oppressive silence broken only by echoes, and the quiet reverence of those seeking solace and community in the shadows. It's a stark contrast to the sun-drenched temples above ground, a testament to belief thriving in secrecy and fear, and a precursor to the eventual dramatic shift in religious landscape. Consider also the private household shrines, Lararia. In every Roman home, no matter how humble or grand, you would find a small shrine dedicated to the lair's household gods and Penates gods of the pantry. You would offer small daily prayers and offerings here, a personal connection to the divine that was intimate and constant. While not inherently sinister, these shrines reinforced the pervasive presence of the gods in every corner of life, a constant reminder that even your most private moments were under divine scrutiny. It also meant that family disputes or misfortunes could be interpreted as a sign of angered household gods, adding a layer of spiritual anxiety to domestic life. And what about the sites of Roman triumphs, while not strictly sacred spaces in the cultic sense? The Triumphal Arch and the Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, served as the culminating points of the most sacred and politically charged procession in Rome. The Roman Triumph. Imagine the victorious general, painted red like Jupiter, riding in his chariot, followed by his legions, parading captives and spoils of war. This wasn't just a military parade. It was a deeply religious act, a sacred procession designed to give thanks to Jupiter for victory. But beneath the glory, you can sense the immense human cost the enslaved captives, the conquered peoples, the bloody reality of Roman expansion. The sacred triumph was built on conquest and subjugation, a chilling reminder of the imperial might consecrated by divine favor. You feel the uncomfortable tension between the awe-inspiring spectacle and the underlying brutality it celebrates. Even the very act of founding a Roman city or colony involved a deeply sacred and somewhat sinister ritual. The act of limitatio, the surveying and demarcation of land, was performed with religious precision, using specific instruments and prayers to define the boundaries of the new settlement, consecrating it to the gods. But this also meant that the land was taken, ritually claimed and blessed for Roman use, often at the expense of indigenous populations. You see the deep furrows plowed, symbolizing the walls, the careful placement of boundary stones, all imbued with religious significance, a silent assertion of Roman dominion sanctioned by the gods. It underscores how every aspect of Roman expansion was rooted in both military might and religious legitimization. These sacred spaces, whether public temples, hidden groves, or domestic shrines, reveal a complex and often contradictory picture of Roman religiosity. They were places of profound devotion, but also sites where power was asserted, where fear was managed, and where hidden dramas unfolded. You realize that the grandeur of Roman architecture often masked a deeper, more unsettling spiritual reality, one where the divine was always present, always demanding, and sometimes utterly terrifying. The beauty of the columns and the intricate carvings often belied the chilling secrets contained within their hallowed grounds. You've explored the dark corners of Roman sacred spaces, but now you're about to witness how the gods truly interfered with human destiny, often with devastating results: prophecy, madness, and manipulation. This isn't just about interpreting omens. It's about the direct, often terrifying, pronouncements from oracles and seers, whose cryptic words could lead entire cities to glory or utter ruin. You're stepping into a world where knowledge of the future was both a desperate desire and a terrifying burden, a powerful tool wielded by both gods and cunning mortals. Imagine standing in the sacred precinct of an oracle. While the most famous, and perhaps most disturbing, was the Oracle of Delphi Greek, but deeply revered and consulted by Romans. The Romans had their own institutions for seeking divine will. You might visit a temple where priests would interpret the Sibylline books, ancient collections of prophecies only consulted in times of extreme national crisis. You picture the anxious Roman senators, their faces etched with worry during a famine, plague, or military disaster, waiting for the priests to painstakingly interpret the cryptic verses. The prophecies were deliberately ambiguous, capable of multiple interpretations, which meant the priests held immense power, able to sway public opinion and political decisions based on their divine understanding. Historians still vigorously debate the political uses and abuses of oracular prophecies throughout Roman history. It's a chilling reminder that divine pronouncements could be expertly manipulated to serve very human agendas. But what about the direct interaction? The divine possession that truly unsettled the Romans? Think of the Sibyl of Cumae, a priestess of Apollo. You can almost hear her voice, raspy and echoing from the depths of her cave, as she delivers prophecies, not in her own voice, but as a vessel for the god. The Romans believed she lived for centuries. Her body withered, yet her voice, though tiny, continued to speak the will of Apollo. Imagine approaching her, knowing that the words she uttered were not her own, but those of a powerful, often enigmatic, deity. Her prophecies were often terrifying, speaking of wars, plagues, and the rise and fall of empires. You feel the hair on your arms stand up, realizing that to seek such knowledge was to invite madness, or at least profound unease, into your own mind. It's a raw, visceral connection to the divine, one that strips away human agency and replaces it with the terrifying mouthpiece of a god. Then there's the unsettling concept of divine madness, furor divinus. The gods didn't just communicate, they could seize control of a mortal mind, driving them to acts of heroism, or more often, unspeakable horror. You remember the tales of Hercules, driven to temporary madness by Juno, resulting in him tragically murdering his own wife and children. Imagine waking up from such a state. The bloody hands, the shattered lives, the realization that you were merely a puppet in a divine vendetta. It's a profound violation of free will, a terrifying reminder that your very sanity could be snatched away by a capricious deity. You try to reconcile the image of a hero with the horrifying reality of a god-inflicted psychosis. This divine manipulation wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about fulfilling a divine plan, even if it meant great suffering for the mortals involved. Recall Aeneas, the hero of Virgil's Aeneid? He is constantly guided, and often tormented. By the gods, Venus, his mother, protects him. But Juno, still nursing her hatred for the Trojans, relentlessly pursues him with storms, wars, and misfortunes. You see him, a man of piety and duty, buffeted by divine whims, forced to abandon love, face unimaginable dangers, and sacrifice personal happiness for a destiny he didn't choose, but was ordained by the fates. His journey is a testament to the idea that even chosen heroes are mere pawns in the cosmic game, their lives dictated by the ever-shifting alliances and animosities of the gods. You feel a deep empathy for Aeneas, a good man subjected to relentless divine interference, forced to endure endless trials not because of his own failings, but because of a divine family feud. The very act of seeking prophetic knowledge often came with a heavy cost. Many ancient figures who glimpsed the future were cursed with knowledge they couldn't escape, or were disbelieved despite their accurate pronouncements. Cassandra, for instance, was cursed by Apollo because she spurned his advances with the gift of prophecy, but the curse ensured that no one would ever believe her warnings. You can almost hear her desperate cries as she foretells the fall of Troy, or her own murder, knowing that her words, though true, will be dismissed as madness. It's a horrifying form of psychological torture. To see the future clearly and be utterly powerless to change it or convince others. The practice of extispicy, examining the entrails of sacrificed animals, was another form of divination that blended religious ritual with a chilling sense of forensic analysis. You might watch a haruspice, his hands stained, meticulously examining the liver of a freshly sacrificed sheep. Every lobe, every blemish, every unusual mark was a sign, a message from the gods about the future or the current divine mood. A distorted liver could mean imminent defeat in battle, a malformed organ a terrible omen for a marriage. This wasn't guesswork. It was a deeply ingrained, ritualized system of reading the divine will through organic matter. You feel the palpable tension as important figures await the haruspex's pronouncements, their decisions, and possibly their lives, hanging on the state of an animal's innards. It's a truly visceral form of prophecy, where the sacred and the grotesque are intimately intertwined. Even the everyday practice of augury, interpreting the flight patterns and calls of birds, reveals a pervasive belief in divine communication. You, as a Roman, would constantly be aware of the sky, watching for auspicious birds like eagles or inauspicious ones like owls. A flock of birds flying from a certain direction, or a particular cry, could indicate divine favor or displeasure for an upcoming venture. Imagine the mental gymnastics required, constantly observing and interpreting, living in a world where the very movements of nature were divine whispers, demanding your attention and influencing your actions. This system could easily be manipulated by clever politicians or priests, claiming divine sanction for their own schemes. The Roman fascination with prophecy and divine manipulation stemmed from a fundamental human desire to control the uncontrollable, to gain an advantage in a chaotic world. But the myths reveal that this control often came at a terrible price: the loss of free will, the infliction of madness, or the burden of unheeded, agonizing knowledge. The gods, in their pronouncements, weren't just benevolent guides. They were cosmic puppeteers, pulling the strings of mortal destiny, often for reasons incomprehensible to human understanding. You begin to grasp that for the Romans, the future wasn't something you simply made. It was something that was revealed, often through terrifying means, by powerful and unpredictable entities. This constant search for divine guidance, this reliance on omens and prophecies, created a deeply anxious society, perpetually seeking reassurance from a pantheon that offered little in the way of comfort, and much in the way of unsettling truths. The whispers of the Sibyl, the telltale signs in the sky, the gory interpretations of animal entrails, all served as constant reminders that your life, your fate, was never truly your own. You've explored the unnerving prophecies and the unsettling madness inflicted by the gods, but now you're going to witness a profound and often brutal shift in the Roman world, the fading echoes of paganism. This isn't a sudden, dramatic end, but a slow, grinding decline of the old gods as new beliefs began to take hold across the empire. You are about to experience the tension, the persecution, and the gradual, sometimes violent, triumph of a new spiritual order that would irrevocably reshape the Roman psyche. Imagine yourself in the bustling streets of Rome, perhaps in the 3rd or 4th century CE. The grand temples still stand, but a subtle change is in the air. You might notice fewer elaborate public sacrifices and more quiet, clandestine gatherings in private homes or, as you recall from earlier, in the chilling darkness of the catacombs. This is the era when Christianity, once a persecuted sect, began to gain significant traction, offering a radically different worldview from the ancient Roman pantheon. This new faith offered a single, benevolent God, a promise of salvation, and a sense of community that often contrasted sharply with the capricious and demanding nature of the old deities. The shift wasn't easy, and it was often marked by brutal persecution. You recall the periods under emperors like Nero or Diocletian, when Christians were scapegoated, tortured, and executed for their refusal to participate in the imperial cult or offer sacrifices to the Roman gods. Imagine the fear, merely owning a copy of the scriptures, or refusing to burn a pinch of incense to the emperor, could lead to imprisonment, torture, or a gruesome death in the arena. You see families torn apart, homes burned, all in the name of upholding the old religious order. This wasn't just a clash of beliefs, it was a desperate struggle for social and political control, with the Roman state viewing Christian refusal as an act of treason. The steadfastness of many martyrs, their willingness to face death rather than recant, ironically only strengthened the resolve of others and spread the faith further. But then came a pivotal, almost unbelievable turning point: Constantine the Great. You envision the dramatic moment before the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 CE, when Constantine allegedly saw a vision of a cross in the sky with the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." Whether a genuine divine revelation or a shrewd political move, it marked a dramatic shift. Constantine's subsequent Edict of Milan in 313 CE granted religious tolerance throughout the empire, effectively ending the systematic persecution of Christians. You feel a collective sigh of relief from the Christian communities, an end to generations of terror. This didn't make Christianity the official state religion, but it gave it legal standing and freedom to openly proselytize, a freedom it had never known. You begin to witness the gradual erosion of the pagan god's influence. Temples, once vibrant centers of activity, slowly lose their congregations. Some are abandoned. Others fall into disrepair. You might see a once grand altar covered in dust, or a statue of a god subtly defaced. This isn't always overt destruction. Sometimes it's simply neglect. A quiet fading away as people turn their spiritual energies elsewhere. The resources that once flowed to pagan cults now slowly redirect towards the burgeoning Christian church, funding its construction of grand basilicas that would eventually rival the old temples in splendor. By the late 4th century, the tables had turned dramatically. With emperors like Theodosius I, Christianity became the official state religion of the Roman Empire. You see the laws change, now actively suppressing pagan practices. Pagan holidays are abolished, temples are closed, and even private worship of the old gods becomes illegal. Imagine the shock, the dismay. Among those who still clung to the ancient ways, the practices of their ancestors, now deemed illegal and idolatrous. You might witness a group of zealous Christians tearing down a statue of Jupiter, or defacing a frieze depicting the old gods. This isn't just religious conversion, It's a cultural revolution, a conscious effort to erase the spiritual bedrock of centuries. Scholars continue to analyze the extent of forced conversion versus voluntary adoption of Christianity during this period, acknowledging both active suppression and genuine belief. This suppression wasn't always peaceful. There were instances of violence, of pagan scholars and priests being targeted, and of ancient texts being destroyed. You feel the tension in the air, the sense of impending doom for the old ways, a poignant sadness for the passing of an era. The intellectual and philosophical traditions tied to paganism also suffered. The great philosophical schools, which often intertwined with pagan deities and cosmology, found themselves challenged by the rising tide of Christian theology. Libraries were purged, and knowledge that didn't align with the new orthodoxies was often lost or suppressed. The old gods didn't disappear entirely. Of course, their names persisted in the days of the week, in constellations, in literature, and even in popular superstitions. You still refer to Tuesday, related to Mars, Wednesday, Woden's Day, related to Mercury, Thursday, Thor's Day, related to Jupiter, and Friday, Frigg's Day, related to Venus. These linguistic echoes are a subtle, almost invisible, testament to their enduring presence. You recognize their faces in art and sculpture, even if the reverence that once accompanied them has faded. The transition marked a profound change in the Roman worldview. The capricious, human-like gods, demanding sacrifice and offering ambiguous omens, were largely replaced by a single, omnipotent, and omnipresent God, who offered a clear moral code and the promise of eternal salvation. This shift brought both comfort and new forms of anxieties. The fear of divine wrath remained, but it was now focused on a singular, all-powerful judge rather than a squabbling pantheon. The emphasis moved from appeasing external forces to cultivating internal virtue and faith. You reflect on the vast psychological chasm between these two religious systems. The polytheistic world, with its multiple deities, offered a rich tapestry of myths, a complex understanding of human nature reflected in the gods' flaws. The monotheistic world, while offering clarity and moral certainty, also introduced a new kind of rigidity, a definitive truth that often brooked no dissent. The disturbing facts about Roman gods, their infidelities, their cruelties, their petty squabbles, were, in a way, more relatable to the human condition. The new divine being, while benevolent, was also infinitely more mysterious and demanding of absolute faith. The fading echoes of paganism represent the end of an era, a transition from a polytheistic world saturated with fear of unpredictable divine forces to a monotheistic one driven by a different kind of fear and hope. You witness the silence descending upon the once vibrant altars, the crumbling of statues, and the slow, inevitable march of a new faith that would define Europe for centuries to come. It's a poignant testament to the impermanence of even the most deeply held beliefs and the relentless, sometimes brutal, cycle of cultural and spiritual change. You've witnessed the slow, inevitable decline of the old gods, their temples growing silent and their rituals fading into history. But now, you're going to explore a fascinating and perhaps unsettling truth: how these ancient, disturbing divine narratives subtly persist in modern culture and language, often without your realizing it. Echoes in modernity. You're about to see that while the Romans and their gods may be long gone, their stories, their names, and even their darker impulses continue to shape the world you inhabit, a silent testament to their enduring power. Think about the very words you use every day. Your calendar is a veritable pantheon of Roman deities. You recall how you just went through July Julius Caesar, deified, and soon you'll be an August Augustus, son of a god. But look at the days of your week. You've got Tuesday, derived from Taiu, the Norse equivalent of Mars, the Roman god of war. Wednesday is Woden's Day, Woden being the Germanic equivalent of Mercury, the messenger god. Thursday belongs to Thor, the Norse parallel to Jupiter. king of the gods. And Friday is Frigg's day, Frigg being the Norse counterpart to Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. You realize that centuries after their active worship ceased, these ancient divine beings still mark the passage of your time, a quiet, almost invisible linguistic legacy. Consider the very names of the planets in your solar system. You've got Mercury, the swift messenger; Venus, the dazzling bringer of light; Mars, the red planet of war; Jupiter, the giant king; Saturn, the ringed titan; and further out, Neptune, the blue giant; and Pluto, the distant dwarf. Even though Pluto's planetary status has been debated, its name remains firmly rooted in the Roman underworld. You're looking up at the night sky, and you're essentially gazing upon a celestial map named by ancient Roman gods. It's a powerful, enduring connection to their worldview, showing how their myths once defined the very cosmos they perceived. It's enough to make you wonder what other hidden layers of ancient belief still underpin your seemingly modern reality. Beyond names, think about common phrases and expressions that have their roots in Roman mythology. When you speak of someone having Herculean strength, you're directly referencing Hercules, son of Jupiter, whose immense labors defined legendary power. If someone makes a titanic effort, you're evoking the mighty Titans, the primordial gods overthrown by Jupiter. When you describe a beautiful woman as a Venus, you're calling upon the Roman goddess of love and beauty. These aren't just quaint literary devices, they are embedded idioms that demonstrate how the Roman myths shaped the very way you describe human attributes and monumental endeavors. It's almost as if the qualities of these ancient deities have become archetypes in your collective consciousness. And what about the concept of justice? While your modern legal systems are far removed from the arbitrary pronouncements of Roman gods, the very idea of a blindfolded figure holding scales often evokes Justitia, the Roman goddess of justice. Her image, a silent guardian of fairness, is ubiquitous in courthouses and legal iconography. You see her, a symbol of impartiality, and realize that even abstract concepts have their roots in ancient personifications. While Roman justice could be brutal and manipulative, the ideal of a balanced, unbiased system found its form in their divine figures. Even the darker aspects of Roman mythology find their way into your cultural understanding. When you describe someone as narcissistic, you're referencing the Greek myth of Narcissus, whose self-obsession led to his tragic demise, a story often echoed in Roman versions. When you speak of a venereal disease, you're indirectly referencing Venus, the goddess of love, a rather dark twist on her domain. These subtle linguistic connections suggest that even the more unsettling aspects of Roman divine narratives have seeped into your vocabulary, becoming almost invisible parts of your everyday language. Think about the pervasive cultural narrative of powerful, often flawed, leaders. The stories of emperors striving for deification. Their immense egos and brutal reigns resonate with modern political dramas. You see politicians striving for absolute power, exhibiting unchecked ambition, and perhaps even losing touch with reality. These narratives, whether conscious or subconscious, tap into an ancient understanding of power's corrupting influence, a theme vividly illustrated by the Roman emperor gods. The specter of a leader becoming detached, believing themselves infallible, is an echo of the Caligulas and Neros, a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked authority. Even in popular entertainment, the echoes are strong. Superhero narratives, with their pantheons of powerful, often squabbling beings with human-like flaws and incredible powers, bear a striking resemblance to the Roman gods. You see characters like Superman, a modern Jupiter, Wonder Woman, a modern Minerva, or Thor, a modern Hercules Jupiter figure navigating complex moral dilemmas and battling powerful foes. These stories tap into the same archetypal patterns of divine power, human frailty, and epic conflict that defined Roman mythology. You're consuming modern versions of ancient epics, often without realizing the deep historical roots of these character types and narrative arcs. The disturbing aspects of Roman mythology, the divine violence, the capricious nature of power, the arbitrary punishments, the dark rituals, also find their way into modern psychological archetypes and horror narratives. The concept of the trickster god or the vengeful spirit that lurks in many modern stories has its roots in figures like Mercury or the frightening larvae in lemurs. The idea of unseen forces or curses affecting one's life, though perhaps viewed through a different lens, still resonates with modern superstitions and psychological anxieties. You might not believe in the evil eye, but the fear of envy or unseen ill will still exists, a subtle echo of ancient paranoia. The legacy of Roman paganism isn't just about grand statues and crumbling ruins. It's woven into the very fabric of your language, your calendar, your understanding of the cosmos, and even the stories you tell yourselves. The Roman gods, in their disturbing glory and their very human flaws, have become indelible parts of your cultural DNA. You realize that even as you dismiss them as ancient myths, their echoes continue to shape your reality in ways you might never have fully appreciated. It's a powerful, silent testament to the enduring impact of ancient beliefs, proving that even when gods die, their influence can live on for millennia. You've traced the subtle threads of Roman paganism through your modern world, recognizing their indelible mark on your language and culture. But now, as you ease towards the end of this journey, it's time to confront the lingering unease. This isn't about grand historical events or explicit rituals. It's about the enduring psychological impact of a world ruled by capricious, all-powerful beings, and how that sense of unease might still resonate within you. A faint echo of ancient anxieties. Imagine the psychological burden of living in ancient Rome, where your fate was constantly at the mercy of unpredictable gods. You'd never truly feel safe. A good harvest could be followed by a sudden plague, a military victory by a devastating earthquake. Each event, good or bad, was interpreted as a sign of divine favor or, more often, divine wrath. You'd be perpetually on edge, trying to interpret every rustle of leaves, every strange dream, every animal's cry as a message from above. This constant need to appease, to interpret, to fear the divine, must have bred a deep, almost subconscious, anxiety. You realize that your modern world, despite its challenges, offers a sense of control, a belief in predictable laws of nature that the Romans simply didn't possess. Consider the arbitrariness of divine justice. You recall Marsyas flayed alive for daring to be too good at music, or Arachne transformed into a spider for her weaving prowess. These aren't stories of just punishment. They're tales of disproportionate, almost petty, divine cruelty. How would you live in a world where your very talents could be your undoing? Where success could attract not admiration, but vengeful attention from an insecure deity? This concept of being punished for being too good or too proud could breed a cautious, almost self-effacing mentality. A subtle suppression of ambition, lest it incur divine jealousy. You might find yourself instinctively downplaying your achievements, a vestige of ancient humility in the face of omnipotent, jealous powers. The omnipresent threat of divine madness, the furor divinus, is another deeply unsettling legacy. The idea that your sanity, your very will, could be hijacked by a god for their own inscrutable purposes is terrifying. Imagine waking up from such a state, or witnessing someone you know descend into god-inflicted madness. It would instill a profound fear of losing control, of becoming a puppet in a cosmic drama you don't understand. This ancient fear might manifest in a modern anxiety about mental health, about the fragility of the mind, a lingering echo of a time when madness was not just an illness, but a direct divine assault. Even the concept of fate, fatum, carries a quiet dread. While you might believe in destiny, the Roman concept was far more rigid, often preordained and inescapable, regardless of your efforts. You can imagine the fatalism that would settle upon a society convinced that their lives were merely threads in the fate's unfeeling hands. This could lead to a sense of powerlessness, a quiet resignation to whatever misfortunes life, or the gods, might throw your way. You might find yourself, even today, feeling a moment of quiet despair when confronted with overwhelming forces, a fleeting connection to that ancient sense of inescapable destiny. The intertwining of political power with divine authority, as seen with the emperor gods, also leaves a chilling mark. It created a system where resistance to the state was religious sacrilege, where dissent was heresy. This fusion of church and state, with its potential for absolute tyranny, resonates with historical periods where political power was cloaked in divine right, leading to crusades, inquisitions, and religious wars. You can sense the lingering unease about unchecked authority, a deep-seated distrust of leaders who claim a divine mandate, a very human response to the terrifying precedents set by figures like Caligula or Nero. And what about the sheer casualness of divine violence in Roman myths, gods engaging in rape, murder, incest, and cruel transformations? These weren't just stories, they were reflections of the powerful, terrifying forces Romans believed governed their world. While your modern sensibilities might recoil, these narratives normalized a certain level of brutality and moral ambiguity at the highest levels of power. You might find yourself, perhaps unconsciously, still grappling with the idea that power can exist without inherent goodness, a concept deeply ingrained in the Roman pantheon. The constant need for propitiation, the endless sacrifices, the meticulous adherence to omens, it all speaks to a profound fear of offending the divine. This fear of doing something wrong and incurring catastrophic supernatural consequences could breed a culture of anxiety and ritualistic behavior. You might find yourself, even today, engaging in small personal rituals for luck, or feeling a twinge of discomfort if you tempt fate, a quiet echo of that ancient, pervasive desire to appease the unseen powers. Ultimately, the lingering unease of Roman paganism is the profound psychological imprint left by a worldview where the universe was not inherently benevolent or predictable. It was a place of immense power, often wielded arbitrarily, by beings with human flaws magnified to cosmic proportions. This worldview bred a deep-seated caution, a pervasive anxiety, and a constant awareness of human vulnerability. You carry a faint echo of that world within you, a subconscious understanding that beneath the order and predictability of modern life, there are still forces, perhaps not divine, but equally immense and unpredictable, that can reshape your reality in an instant. The Romans wrestled with these ideas every day, and a part of their struggle, their unease, still resonates in the quiet corners of your own mind.